"He who dares not offend cannot be honest." That quote from Thomas Paine is a divine key, a sacred activation code for the soul that has felt trapped in a world demanding performance. You feel it, don't you? The deep, resonant truth that vibrates behind those words. It speaks to the part of you that has been polished, softened, and edited for public consumption. You were not born this way. You didn't consciously choose to build a fortress around your heart, to present a carefully curated echo of your true self to the world. No, this was a subtle domestication of your spirit, a slow and meticulous training program you never even knew you had enrolled in. It happened in the quiet moments. You've long forgotten a disapproving glance from a parent when you were too loud, a teacher's red pen, correcting not just your grammar, but your unconventional thoughts, the laughter of peers, when you revealed a vulnerability they deemed strange. Each one was a tiny, almost imperceptible negotiation where you traded a piece of your authentic soul for a moment of safety, a fleeting feeling of belonging. This is a message for those who are ready to break free from that invisible prison. If this frequency resonates with your journey, let the universe know by liking and subscribing. Share your awakening in the comments below with a simple, "I am not alone," or "I resonate," because your story is a beacon for others who are just beginning to see the bars of their own cage. You were meticulously trained into this state of being, not in one grand, dramatic moment of surrender, but in 1,000 tiny concessions that slowly eroded the wild, untamed landscape of your inner world. It began with the primal fear of being misunderstood. Do you remember that searing panic? The moment someone misinterpreted your pure intention, and a tidal wave of anxiety washed over you. In that split second, your survival instinct screamed louder than your integrity. "Wait, that's not what I meant. Don't get the wrong idea." That desperate plea was not a defense of your truth. It was a negotiation for your social survival. It was the first time you learned that the tribe's perception of you was more critical than your own connection to your higher self. That was the moment the performance began. Not a dramatic collapse, not a soul-shattering scream, but a subtle, almost silent shift in your very vibration. You stepped out of the raw, unfiltered energy of your own being and into a role, a carefully constructed character designed for one purpose: to be liked, to be accepted, to be safe. And the world, the grand stage manager of this illusion, rewarded you handsomely for your performance. It showered you with the currency of its approval: smiles, nods, promotions, invitations. You learned the script, mastered the delivery, and played your part with such precision that you almost convinced yourself it was real. You gained their peace, but at what cost? Because deep inside, in the sacred chambers of your soul, something vital died. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, a man who intimately understood the torment of the individual, called this the silent death of the individual before the crowd. It is a spiritual demise that leaves the body walking and talking, but the soul hollowed out. You've felt it, haven't you? That sharp, twisting pang in your gut when you bite your tongue, holding back a truth that burns for release. That slow, grinding erosion of your spirit every time you over-explain yourself, sanding down the magnificent edges of who you are just to make yourself more palatable, more easily digestible for those who have no appetite for the raw truth. You weren't lying, not in the conventional sense, but you were no longer honest. Your compass was no longer your inner truth, but the shifting winds of social consensus. You began to speak not what was true, but what made sense within their limited framework. You smiled to diffuse a confrontation that your soul was yearning to have. You agreed to stay included in circles where your spirit felt suffocated. You apologized for being too much, too intense, too quiet, too blunt, too real. You learned to measure your words, to read the room before you ever dared to read your own heart. But make no mistake, that was not kindness. That was not maturity. That was fear, a deep and pervasive fear that had been programmed into your very cells. At some point on your journey, you absorbed a toxic and pervasive lie, that to be accepted, you must be edited. And so you became a master editor, a skilled filter, a social chameleon who could blend into any environment but could no longer find your own true colors in the process. You see, you didn't evolve. You fragmented. You became socially fluent but spiritually mute. The world taught you its primary commandments. Don't be hated. Don't rock the boat. Don't challenge the frame. And in exchange for your obedience, it promised you safety. But safety from what? Was it safety from being alone? Or was it safety from ever being truly, magnificently, and dangerously real? This isn't about confidence. This is about presence. And you lost yours the moment you decided that being misunderstood was a greater danger than being false. Every time you uttered the words, "I didn't mean it like that," you were broadcasting a signal to the collective, a desperate plea that said, "You can define me. You can set the terms of my existence. I will play along." You weren't defending your reputation. You were abandoning your divine essence. And for this, they loved you. The quieter you became, the more they clapped. The more you conformed, the more they celebrated you. But deep down, you knew. You knew something was profoundly wrong. There was a hollowness, a staged quality to your existence, as if you were watching your own life from just outside your body. You weren't truly living. You were performing. And for what? So that people who don't speak your soul's language would keep a seat for you at their table. So that you could maintain a harmony that was built on the deafening silence of your own heart? Here is the truth that will shatter that illusion. You're not afraid of being hated. You are terrified of being rejected while being fully and unapologetically yourself. Because if they hate the mask, you can survive that. You can change the mask, get a new one, improve the performance. But if they hate the truth, the raw, unfiltered, inconvenient, divine you, then what? That is the wound you have been so desperately avoiding. But let me ask you this. If the price of being loved is your silence, was it ever love at all? You think you are being polite, considerate, reasonable, agreeable, a decent person. But look closer. You were groomed. Not in some dark, sinister alley, but in the brightly lit hallways of your schools, in the hallowed pews of your churches, at the polished surfaces of your dinner tables and corporate boardrooms. You were groomed by HR meetings, by dating apps, by LinkedIn bios. It was in the way they smiled when you behaved and frowned when you didn't. You were trained to be liked, to be safe, to be, sive nothing too much. They never explicitly told you to lie. Oh no, the programming is far more sophisticated than that. They told you to be respectful, to be diplomatic, to be a team player. They told you to compromise, to be mature, to not make waves, and you believed them. Because you saw what happened to the ones who didn't play along. You saw the loud ones, the intense ones, the unfiltered ones, get exiled, mocked, dismissed, labeled as difficult, negative, toxic. So you learned fast. You learned how to smile at the right moments, how to keep the fire out of your voice, how to say what was acceptable instead of what was true. But that isn't maturity. That is programming. And this program has a singular, insidious goal: to make you tolerable, digestible, and controllable. It is designed to shave off your sharpness, to sand down your brilliance until you fit neatly inside their frame. They say it's about harmony, but it's really about their comfort. They say it's about unity, but it's about control. It's about fear, not your fear, but theirs. The system doesn't fear evil men. Evil men often play the game better than anyone. No, the system fears real men. It fears men who don't need permission to speak, men who carry their truth like a sword not to wound, but simply to stand. It fears men who don't ask, "Will this make me likable?" but ask, "Is this who I am?" Kierkegaard declared that the crowd is untruth. He didn't mean that people are inherently bad. He meant that the moment you surrender your unique truth to a collective standard, you become an echo. You become fake. You stop being a sovereign individual and become a reaction, a piece of the collective illusion. And here's the catch. The system rewards you the more you abandon yourself. Smile more, you get applause. Stay quiet, you get promoted. Agree with nonsense, and you get praised for being open-minded. But try saying something raw, something real, something that carries the undeniable weight of your soul's frequency, and watch how fast the room shifts. Truth has a gravity to it, and not everyone is strong enough to stand in its field. So, they will label you arrogant, angry, unreasonable, rude, not because you are any of those things, but because you refuse to bend to their weakness. They will label you because you said something that couldn't be digested without discomfort, and nothing terrifies the modern world more than discomfort. This is the game: be loved or be free. You cannot be both. Because freedom means not everyone gets access to you. Not everyone gets a version of you they can approve of. Freedom costs likability. Truth costs harmony. And that is where the real trial begins. Every single day, you are being judged, not for your crimes, but for your very presence. They put you on trial for not performing, for not playing your part. And when you dare to defend yourself, you unwittingly enter their court, playing by their rules, using their logic, speaking on their terms. You say, "Please, understand me," but what the system hears is, "I still need your approval." You say, "I didn't mean to offend," but what they hear is, "I'll behave next time." That is how they keep you in line. Not with chains and whips, but with expectations and shame. They don't have to punish you. They've trained you to punish yourself. Every time you self-edit, every time you apologize for being too much, you reaffirm the invisible contract. I will trade my soul for social peace. And for what? A seat at their table? A smile that vanishes the moment you stop pleasing them? Tell me, how many times have you diluted your truth just to remain in rooms you didn't even respect? You weren't hated because you were rude, or selfish, or broken. You were hated because you stopped pretending. You were hated because you stopped playing their game. You were hated because, with your silence or your simple, unadorned truth, you said, "This is who I am, take it or leave it." And they left. Not because you were wrong, but because you refused to confirm their illusions anymore. That is what made you dangerous, not your voice, but your presence. You no longer gave them what their fragile egos needed, a reflection that comforted them, a version of reality they could swallow without choking. You became inconvenient, unscripted, and undeniable. And that's all it takes. You don't have to yell, you don't have to fight, you don't have to challenge anyone directly. Just stand there, unapologetically real, and watch the room grow nervous. You'll see the shift. They'll fidget, they'll joke, they'll try to box you back in. Because when you stop playing the polite character, they no longer know what to do with you. You're not the problem, you're the mirror, and they hate what they see in it. They hate that you're not afraid to stand alone. They hate that you're not craving their validation. They hate that your truth doesn't ask for their permission, because it forces them to ask a question they've been running from their entire lives. What part of myself have I buried just to be accepted? Jesus wasn't hated because he lied. He was hated because he didn't scream, he didn't riot, he didn't flatter, and he certainly didn't adjust his truth to win favor with the crowd. He simply was, and that's why they turned on him. Not because he broke the law, but because he refused to bend to their version of it. He wasn't a rebel. He was a rupture, a threat to the entire illusion of order. He stood there, clear-eyed, silent, and unbending, and that presence, that refusal to comply, was unbearable. Because the crowd doesn't need you to believe in their lie, they just need you to pretend. And when you stop pretending, they don't see courage, they see betrayal. Because you've just made it painfully obvious that the emperor has no clothes, and that terrifies them. So they'll say you've changed, that you're cold, that you've become arrogant. They'll call it ego, but what they're really seeing is the weight of your unfiltered self. They'll call it defiance, but it's really just clarity. You are not aggressive. You are just no longer available for the performance. And that's what breaks them, not your anger, but your absence from their script. You are no longer playing the character they can control. You are not in their script, so they will try to provoke you, corner you, shame you back into the role. But remember this, you are not hated for your flaws. You are hated for your refusal to perform. You don't fit their expectations anymore, and rather than question the expectations, they attack the man who doesn't fit them. It's easier, it's safer, it keeps the lie intact. Because if you are right, then they have to face how long they've been living wrong, and most people would rather call you dangerous than admit they've betrayed themselves. So no, you are not being rejected because you are too much. You are being rejected because you no longer confirm their comfort, because your truth no longer bends to their myth. And maybe that's the point of all this. Not to be liked, not to be understood, but to be so undeniably real that your presence itself makes the false tremble. They ask you to explain, to clarify, to soften the blow, to be reasonable. They act like it's a conversation, but it's a trap. Because the moment you explain yourself, you've already stepped back onto their stage. You've re-entered the performance. And they smile, because now they have something to label, a role to assign you, a box to place you in. But when you stay silent, they panic, because silence doesn't fit. It doesn't give them a costume, a narrative, a label. It just is. And that terrifies them more than anything you could say. Because silence isn't passive, it's active refusal. It's a man who no longer negotiates, no longer adjusts, no longer asks to be seen correctly. Silence says, you don't get to interpret me anymore. Not out of pride, not out of spite, but out of absolute clarity. You've seen the script, you've seen how the game works, and you've decided, I'm done performing for an audience that's already made up its mind. Jesus stood in front of power, accused, interrogated, condemned, and he said nothing. Not because he was afraid, but because he was free. Free from the need to win, to prove, to persuade. Because the truth doesn't need a defense when it no longer needs approval. They asked him questions, demanded answers, begged for justification, but he stayed still. Not because he lacked courage, but because he was too real to play by unreal rules. Kierkegaard once wrote, "The single individual before God is more terrifying than 10,000 before men, because a man alone with his truth is a force no system can process. He can't be swayed, he can't be bribed, he can't be shamed into compliance. He has exited the game. And that makes him unpredictable, that makes him dangerous. When you stop defending yourself, you don't lose power, you reclaim it, because power doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it doesn't prove, it simply stands. It stares back at the world, unblinking, unapologetic, and unavailable for negotiation, and the crowd simply cannot handle that. They need you to react, to explain, to squirm, because the moment you don't, you force them to face their own discomfort. Your silence becomes a mirror, and what they see is not your aggression, but their own fragility. So they will poke, provoke, and twist your words, trying to drag you back into the performance. Do not bite, because the moment you start performing again, you become predictable, and predictable men are easy to control. But silence is sacred, because it refuses the script, refuses the character, refuses the entire damn stage. And here is the real twist. Silence isn't what you offer the world, it's what you take back for yourself. The next question is, what happens when you stop explaining and they still keep pushing? Why does defending yourself only make it worse? They taught you that explaining yourself was a sign of maturity, of goodwill, of peacekeeping. But what if that's the first layer of your domestication? What if the moment you explain, you're not clarifying anything, you're just confirming that you still think you need their permission to exist? That is the trap. You think you're defending the truth, but you're really defending your right to breathe. And that's exactly where they want you. Because once you're explaining, you're negotiating, you're justifying, you're pleading. You're not an equal anymore. You're a man asking to be understood by people who never intended to understand you in the first place.